It's London's Night of Nights, the BAFTAs, Britain's Academy Awards. And as the A-list braves the rain, there are stolen glimpses of Angelina, Brad and James Bond. Along this red carpet of manufactured glamour and youth strides an incongruous figure, Sir David Frost. For half a century, this TV interviewer, extrovert and entrepreneur has moved effortlessly between the powerful, rich and famous.
They made it entertaining and they made it tense and, as well, so a sort of intellectual Rocky.
Tonight, he confronts life, imitating art, imitating television, sharing the stage with the actor who plays David Frost in Hollywood's take on his 1977 confrontation with disgraced US President Richard Nixon.
The man who has committed the greatest felony in American history will never stand trial.
I had an idea for an interview with Richard Nixon.
You're a talk show host.
I spent yesterday watching you interview the Bee Gees. Weren't they terrific? Why would I want to talk to David Frost?
I got $500,000.
Really?
Frost has hired 3 crack investigators.
Can I be crack one? Can I be deep crack?
It was immediately a stunning success, and it was.
For Sir David Frost, it seems there's no such thing as bad publicity. It portrays you in that period as initially as a lightweight, a Concorde flying, champagne sipping lightweight who's having a terribly good time. Yeah. And not really that interested in the content. I mean, it's almost, it's pretty close to defamatory, I would have thought.
Well, if it wasn't recouped by the rest of the film, I think it would be, yeah. But basically, he wanted to do this thing of building up the underdog thing, and I had granted them that I would not have editorial control, which I think was basically a good idea, because people then knew it was independent. And there's only 15% fiction in the film, I think, but that certainly was part of it.
In the early 1960s, the real David Frost unleashed his biting political satire.
That's a magnificently direct answer.
Driven by fierce ambition, Frost wanted to do more than play the audience for laughs.
Do you believe, all of you, in equal pay for women?
I felt a need to move on, and I'd been to America, I'd seen talk shows in America. There were no talk shows here. I didn't want to do a talk show that was pure showbiz, but was a combination of things like showbiz and people playing the spoons, as well as politicians and so on.
This politics as entertainment formula became a huge hit. Frost's mellow, non-confrontational style was widely criticised, but over the following decades, world leaders lined up to play TV celebrity.
Do you think you will actually live to see an independent Palestinian national state, or will you never be allowed to see the promised land?
No. I will invite you to come to visit me there in Palestine.
All right. I'll put the date in my
diary.
Yes,
please.
What is the date?
Frost jet set between shows in Britain, the US and Australia. He'd already notched up 4,000 interviews before facing the toughest challenge of his career.
I did not have a corrupt motive.
After 3 years of negotiation, Richard Nixon agreed to nearly 29 hours of interviews.
Mr. Frost, it's still a small matter of the...
Of course.
The movie shows how that cooperation came at a price.
I do beg your pardon.
This was unashamed checkbook journalism. Nixon would talk for $600,000. Frost raised the initial $200,000 by selling his shares in a lucrative TV company.
$200,000.
I do hope that isn't coming out of your own pocket.
Well, believe me, sir, I wish my pockets were that deep. Made out in the name of?
Richard Nixon.
Years later, when London Weekend Television was sold to Granada, a very bright communications journalist here in Britain, rang me up and said, "Do you realise, David, that if you hadn't sold those London weekend shares today, you would be getting a cheque for £37 million.
Was it worth it?
Yes, it was. I'd do it all over again because it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity.
I guess it all boils down to Watergate, huh?
Nixon also thought that he'd stitched up a bargain.
Frost is just not in your intellectual class, sir. You're going to be able to dictate terms, rebuild your reputation.
Was there a gotcha moment, if you like, as portrayed in the film, where you present him with a series of facts and the dam wall bursts and you get this very candid monologue? Yes. Or was it calculated on his part? Was this an exercise, a cynical, calculated exercise in damage control, in rehabilitation?
No, I don't think there have been one or two minority thoughts of that, but I think the general view of everybody is right. That, I mean, and I was as close as I am to you now, and I saw what he was going through, and it was in no way prepared or rehearsed at all, and it was agony for him.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
After resigning in disgrace, Richard Nixon had been controversially pardoned by his successor, Gerald Ford. But what he really craved was political rehabilitation.
Why didn't you stop it?
However, in the highest rating political interview in history, Frost didn't stick to the script.
Would you go further than mistakes?
Nixon made an extraordinary admission.
And that was a heart-stopping moment, because instead of answering the question, he said to me,
"What word would you express?"
Now, at that moment, I knew that he was more vulnerable than any time he'd been in his life, and probably would ever be again. So I better really well get this right, because it had to be an ad-lib summary of what we were getting at, as it were. And so I threw the clipboard aside, because I wanted to indicate this was, not something pre-planned. Neither of us were expecting this. This was just him and I, ad-lib, just him and I and a few 100 million people around the world.
I think that there are three things, since you asked me, I would like to hear you say, I think the American people would like to hear you say, and I think unless you say it, you're going to be haunted for the rest of your life.
I said things that were not true. Most of them were fundamentally true on the big issues. I brought myself down. I gave them a sword, and they stuck it in, and they twisted it with relish.
You did do some covering up.
I let down my friends. I let down the country. I let down our system of government and the dreams of all those young people that ought to get into government but will think it's all too corrupt and the rest.
It's now 32 years since this interview series was conducted. Half the audiences out there weren't even born when this happened. What is the appeal? What is the attraction for this period in history?
Well, that's a good question. But since you're doing this program, probably you've got the answer as well. No, I mean, the thing is, I think it is because it was a unique situation. First of all, historically, the first and so far the only president who had to step down from office, relinquish his office, resign. So that gave it an awesome... Secondly, there was the fact that for a variety of reasons, he'd never given any other interview after he left office in those 3 years. He'd never even testified in court because he actually had an attack of phlebitis at the time of the Watergate court case and so on. So that it was all absolutely new and absolutely fresh, and the most dramatic thing, that there was an urgency in the American people at that time to have Nixon arraigned in some way. Some would have wished he'd been in court, but here was a forum in which he is facing these issues, a forum he palpably did not control in any way.
Trial by television.
Yeah, trial by television in a rather dignified version of it. Exactly. A number of people said or wrote that this was a cathartic experience for the American people. And I think it was, because they really needed this to be put behind them by Nixon facing the music in some way or other.
Perhaps the success of the Frost-Nixon film is also due to timing. There are recent parallels with the end of another highly contentious presidency. When Nixon felt unfairly condemned by Watergate, the legacy of George W. Bush is now viewed through the prism of Iraq and the War on Terror. Do you think George W. Bush should perhaps consider a similar series of interviews, cathartic...
George W. Bush would be a very interesting subject because he is much smarter and so on. He's got very, very strong conservative views and so on.
You think he's smarter than Nixon?
No, I think that Nixon had a real depth in terms of his analysis of the depth of an academic almost in dealing with some of the world issues that he was dealing with. George W. Bush was never the caricature he was made in the first year or two of his office when he was people thought he couldn't put two words together, and if you interviewed him you'd only get stuff that had been handed to him, and that was not true. So he's a better subject than that. But George W. Bush, yes, I would find that a very interesting challenge. Yeah.
At nearly 70 years of age, Sir David Frost shows no sign of slowing down.
Hello and welcome to Frost Over the World.
3 years ago, he was back in the headlines with his decision to front Al Jazeera's new English language channel.
OK, David, we are recording. Do it from here.
The Secretary-General joins me now from Cairo.
The Arabic network, owned by the Emir of Qatar, has long been accused by the White House of anti-American bias, of aiding and abetting Washington's enemies in the propaganda campaign of the War on Terror.
I checked out the more lurid rumours about Al Jazeera Arabic.
Were you concerned from what you'd heard about Al Jazeera?
Well, I was concerned to check them, but I mean, I found that, they had never shown beheadings or, those things from years ago. And in fact, that sort of, luckily, that sort of rumour disappears as soon as people have Al Jazeera English in their country.
2, 1, bubble, cue.
On Frost Over the World, after the news...
His weekly show is recorded in Al Jazeera's London bureau, and according to Sir David, is seen in 140 million homes in 100 countries. The target audience, the same people who watch CNN and BBC World.
Once people see the output, either my show or the whole lot, they see that there is no propaganda of the sort that they describe. There is no particular source material from Osama bin Laden or whatever like that.
Would you interview Osama bin Laden?
Well, could I interview Osama bin Laden
if his people called you?
Yeah, on Al Jazeera English. Could I do it? Would I be free to do it? Would there be any editorial problem with Al Jazeera? No. They said there would be no. I would have editorial control, and I've had complete editorial control. So as far as Al Jazeera was concerned, Al Jazeera English, with some trepidation, no doubt they would not have any objection to it at all. The only person who might have an objection to it is me, because, and I think you would be in the same position if this opportunity to emerge for foreign correspondent. I mean, which is that, I mean, is your duty of a citizen in a situation like that greater than your responsibility as a journalist? i.e., shouldn't you, if you're in the room with this threat to the world, shouldn't your first duty be to try and perform a citizen's arrest or whatever, or shoot him? Now, you're not probably going to get out of there very easily anyway, but should you do that? Is one's duty to this evil man greater than your duty to journalism?
But there would be many in the Al Jazeera audience, particularly in the Middle East, who would regard George W. Bush as a criminal. Why should that matter if Osama bin Laden's people call you and say, come and talk. We can cover all subjects. Why is there a problem?
I think that's a very encouraging argument towards being able to do it. But basically, George W. Bush hasn't vowed to wipe a whole country off the map or send people out to perform suicide bombings and all those things on individuals. So I think it is different. You're dealing with someone whose avowed policy is, and to do what he can to Israel, do what he can to other enemies, and therefore I think his declared program is rather different to George W. Bush's.
Mm.
But it's a good debate, and it'd be interesting what your viewers think.
Sir David Frost, thank you.
Pleasure, thank you.